Hi, fifth graders. Today we are going to do the ninth lesson of the 13 Colonies unit, and this one's about the Salem witch trials. We're going to do kind of a quick lesson on this, and we're not going to go too in depth on it because you guys will learn about this a lot in middle school, but it is an important part of the 13 colonies, so we're going to go ahead and learn a little bit about it. So the Salem witch trials took place in Salem Village in 1692 through 1693. And at that time, the villagers in Salem had several years of cold winters, and this made farming really hard, and they had a lot of crop failure. Um, so the people were under a little bit of stress, and morale wasn't really great in the village. There was also a smallpox epidemic. Smallpox was another disease that was usually fatal. A lot of people died from it, and it was very hard to control. So a lot of people were on edge because of that. And then people continued to be very suspicious of the Native Americans, and there was a lot of fear that was spread around about the Native Americans, especially because the Native Americans were different, and we know that people at this time did not really welcome differences of others. So the whole town was populated by Puritans, and we learned about the Puritan way of life in the last lesson. They lived very strict lives, and they were very religious. They did not tolerate differences in others. So anybody who kind of stood out from the norm was not viewed in a very positive way. They were often left out or kind of excommunicated from the village. So what happened was there was this small group, there were 3 of young girls at first, and they claimed that they were possessed by the devil, and they would have what was called like fits. So they would kind of go into like hysteria kind of, and you know, they would seem very ill. And they said that this was because they were possessed by the devil, and they said that there were several women in Massachusetts who were actually like cursing them, and they accused them of witchcraft. So in the end, over 150 women, men and children, were accused of witchcraft, and they were tried. So they went to trial. Some of these people were hanged, some of them were jailed, and then some of them were released. But this was a really big deal that really started off with 2 girls, and then another girl joined, and then it just became a really, really big thing that was a complete disaster. Okay, so the basic timeline of the events of the Salem witch trials started in 1692. In January, there was a man named Reverend Paris, and his daughter and niece fell ill, meaning that they started behaving very strangely. They weren't doing very well. They had kind of like those fits. So then by February and March, the girls accused 3 women of witchcraft. Tituba was a Native American woman, and then Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. They were the 3 that were accused first. In March through June of that same year, many villagers start to be accused and tried of witchcraft. On June 1st, Bridget Bishop is the very first woman who is hanged, and she is hanged in 1692 at Gallows Hill. And then by July through September, 18 more people were hanged. So they were all killed. So there's 19 people killed between June and September of that year. Then in October 1692, all the way into the next year, into May 1693, the governor ends the court of trying witches for witchcraft. 49 of the suspected witches are released from jail. And then later, there were 52 in jail at the time. Later, the rest are released and they're all pardoned. So they're all like forgiven, or, you know, like they were found not guilty, but they had spent a long time in jail. In January of 1697, they decided to do a day of fasting, which means not eating all day or drinking, and prayer in honor of the accused women, men, and children who had served this time in jail or who were hung without really doing anything wrong. And Samuel Sewall, who we'll learn about in a little bit, made a public apology. So in the end of this whole thing, 19 people were hanged and killed, and 5 people died in jail. And then many people spent time in jail, okay? And everything about this was false. So this was just something that was a product of like hysteria, of just getting kind of crazy about something. So there were certain types of evidence that were used in the trials. One of those things is spectral evidence. That means that a person had claimed to be tortured by an apparition, like a ghost, that was in the shape of the accused witch. So this is where the person who said that they were possessed by the devil was saying that they saw a ghostly form of this particular person that they're accusing to be a witch, and that's how they knew. Okay, is that fair? I don't know. I mean, it seems like one person's word, right, that this happened. So maybe not the most fair piece of evidence. Another one is the touch test. So if the accused witch touched the victim during a fit, so during this person feeling ill and kind of acting strangely, and that person stopped acting that way, then it meant the person who touched the victim was a witch. Is that fair? I don't know. I mean, how can you tell that the victim isn't just acting, I guess? Then there's witness testimony. So a witness could testify or say in front of a large group of people what the accused witch was doing and explain what they saw. Okay, so again, this is kind of like one person's word against another's. Then there were physical evidence. So physical evidence included anybody who was accused of a witch, if they had like a birthmark or a wart or a mole or blemishes on their body. I have lots of freckles on my face, so that could be counted. Maybe I would have been thought to be a witch at this time because of that. So definitely another thing. Fair? Not really, because there's no real proof that that's anything. And then there was confession. Now this is where the accused person could confess, okay? And confessors were not hanged, so there was kind of a motivation to confess if you were accused because of that. And you might think this is fair. You might think, well, if somebody admits they're a witch, then, you know, that's fair. But what happened a lot of times is that the accused people would be like tortured until they confessed. So that is not fair. So there really wasn't any fair evidence being used to try and prosecute these people who were accused of witchcraft. So of course there were some leaders in this whole thing. The first of the leaders was Reverend Samuel Parris. He is pictured at the very top of the slide, and he was the father and the uncle of the first afflicted girls, like the first victims. Um, he was a really well-educated man, and he was respected by the community. So this made people believe him. Um, he supported and validated the girls' testimony, so he kind of like stood behind them. Um, he is suspected of influencing the girls to make their accusations of the witches, and he also served as a witness, so he testified against the people who were accused, the women who were accused. Okay, so he was the first one. Then there was Sir William Phips. He was the governor of Massachusetts. Um, he was really well informed about the trials. He supported them, and until while they lasted, he was in complete support of them. He put a stop to them. He was the one that did that, but do you know why? Because his wife was accused of witchcraft. So he put a stop to it. And then at the end, like we saw in the timeline, he pardoned some of the accused who were waiting to be executed. They were in jail waiting to be executed, and he gave them pardons. And then finally, there was Samuel Sewall. He was a judge for the witchcraft trials. He was very well educated, very wealthy. He's the one with the longer white hair in the pictures there. He was selected by Governor Phips to serve as a judge. He was one of 9 judges. And 5 years after the trials, he made a public confession saying that he was ashamed of his part in it, and all these people were innocent, and he just felt horrible about it. Okay, and he was the only judge to do that, but it was like a little too late. But those were the 3 leaders. Then there were the afflicted girls. Afflicted means like the girls that something happened to, right? So these are the girls who felt that they were possessed by the devil. Okay, and there's just like a cartoon drawing of those 3 girls up there. So the first one was Betty Paris, and she was the daughter of Samuel Paris. She was kind of into things like this. So there was a rumor that she was really into fortune telling, and so she was like really interested in kind of the supernatural. In January of that year, these strange behaviors started. So what they called fits. So she had like twisting and twitching in her body, and she would say like nonsensical words, so like funny, goofy words, and she would appear ill. Okay, and so she testified against these accused witches. Then there was Abigail Williams. She was 11, and she was the niece. So Samuel Paris was her uncle. And she also was super into fortune telling, just like her cousin. And she and Betty were the first ones that said that they were afflicted by this, the first ones that had all these fits. And she gave formal testimony in 7 of the cases. And she was involved in 17 cases that resulted in hanging. So there were only 19 cases, and she was involved in 17 of those. So she was a big reason why some of these people were executed. And then there was Ann Putnam Jr. She was 12. She was one of the first girls to join Betty and Abigail. So she was one of the first ones to join in them, and then others followed. She accused 19 people. 11 of those people were hanged. So she had a big part in the people who had died too. Her father was also an aggressive accuser, so he accused a lot of people too. She was the only one of all of the afflicted girls in the Salem witch trials who later admitted she was lying and apologized. Everybody else just stayed quiet about it, but she actually admitted that she was lying. Okay, and then there's the accused. Okay, so the first person is Tituba, who was a Native American slave in the Paris household, and she's pictured at the top. She was one of the first accused. She was also known to play fortune-telling games, so this is probably how the girls got interested in that. And those were forbidden by Puritans, so Puritans were not into that. They did not like that. She was viewed as an outsider. She confessed and accused others of witchcraft too, which many of these women did, and we'll talk about why that is later. She spent 13 months in jail, and but she was never hanged, and we don't really know what happened to her after the trials. Then there was Sarah Good. She was one of the first accused, and she was totally disliked by the community because she was poor and she was homeless. And she had a 6-year-old daughter who was also accused and was put in prison too. And she actually gave birth to a baby girl in prison, and the baby died. And then she was hanged in July. So, but I believe her daughter was released. So she was one of the first accused also. And then there was Sarah Osborne. Sarah Osborne was also disliked by the community. She was disliked because she had a lot of scandal in her family. So one thing is that she had gotten married for a second time, and that marriage to her second husband was scandalous. So people thought it was wrong. And she also was suspected of trying to spend her children's inheritance. So when her first husband died, he left money to their children, and she, I guess, was accused of trying to spend it. So other people didn't like her for that, and they thought she was dishonest, and they didn't like her. She was a total outsider as well, and she never confessed, and she never accused others either. So she just died in prison in May of 1692. Okay, so one thing we really don't know is why exactly all of this happened. It's it's still kind of a mystery, and um, there are some theories about why they happened. Um, Most historians say it's a classic example of hysteria, of mass hysteria. Um, and that's when a group of people all suffer the same hysterical symptoms without a physical cause. And usually people who are under psychological or physical stress experience hysteria. And we know that this was a stressful time with the cold winter, the bad crops, the smallpox scare, the feelings about Native American people, and the fear that was driven into Puritans by leaders about them. So it might have been because of stress. Also, the young girls had no power in the community, and they might have been bored, and this was a way to kind of get attention and be in control. So that's another theory. Another one was that some people thought that the girls had eaten rye, which is like rye bread, like it's a grain that was infected with a fungus, like a growth, a fungus is a decomposer, but that it was infected with a fungus, and that's what caused all of these symptoms. And then finally, some people think that the witch trials were a way for some of the more powerful people in the community to get rid of people in the community that they saw as outsiders or threats to the community. So those were kind of the theories, but nobody really knows exactly why. So your questions on Schoology first are, what similarities are there among the first 3 women accused? So Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. And then It's many of the accused witches confessed and then accused others of witchcraft. So why do you think they did that? We learned that a couple of them did that. Well, actually, many of them did that, but two that we spoke about did that. And why do you think they did that? If they weren't actually witches themselves, why would they accuse other people of being witches? So I want you to go ahead and answer those things on Schoology. And um, after this, we're going to move on to the middle colonies. We'll play Jeopardy for the New England colonies on Tuesday of next week. So I am excited to see you guys at that live lesson, and I hope you have a good weekend.